The morning sun cast long shadows across the polished marble floors of Buckingham Palace as Kate Middleton walked through the grand corridors. Her footsteps echoed softly against the towering walls adorned with centuries-old portraits of monarchs who had ruled before. Today felt different from all the other days she had spent within these walls. There was a weight in the air, a tension that seemed to follow her wherever she went. Kate had been summoned to the blue drawing room for what was described as an urgent family meeting. The message had arrived at dawn, delivered by a stone-faced palace aide who refused to meet her eyes. The formal tone of the invitation told her everything she needed to know. This was not going to be a pleasant conversation. As she approached the ornate double doors of the blue drawing room, Kate could hear muffled voices from within. She recognized King Charles's deep, measured tone, though she couldn't make out the words. There were others present, too. She could distinguish Camilla's crisp accent and what sounded like several senior palace advisors. Kate paused outside the door, straightening her navy blue dress and checking that her pearl earrings were properly positioned. She had learned long ago that appearance mattered immensely in royal circles. Every detail was scrutinized, every gesture analyzed. Today, more than ever, she needed to present herself with dignity and composure. The heavy doors opened before she could knock, revealing a palace footman who bowed slightly before announcing her arrival. "Her Royal Highness, the Princess of Wales," he declared in a voice that carried across the room. Kate stepped inside and immediately sensed the gravity of the situation. King Charles stood near the large windows overlooking the palace gardens, his hands clasped behind his back. His usually warm expression was replaced by something far more serious. Queen Camilla sat in one of the antique chairs, her lips pressed into a thin line. Around the room, several of the king's most trusted advisors stood in silence, their faces revealing nothing. "Your Majesty," Kate said, offering a respectful curtsy. She had performed this gesture thousands of times, but today it felt heavier somehow, weighted with unspoken significance. King Charles turned from the window, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity she had rarely seen before. "Kate, please, take a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair across from Camilla. His voice was kind but strained, as if he was struggling with what he needed to say. Kate moved gracefully to the indicated chair, settling herself with the poise that had been drilled into her through years of royal training. She folded her hands in her lap and waited, knowing that in these formal settings, it was proper protocol to let the monarch speak first. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Kate could hear the distant sounds of London traffic beyond the palace walls, but inside this room, the quiet was almost overwhelming. She noticed how the morning light caught the gold threads in the room's elaborate wallpaper, how dust motes danced in the sunbeams streaming through the tall windows. Finally, King Charles cleared his throat. "Kate, what I'm about to share with you must remain within these walls," he began, his voice heavy with the weight of royal responsibility. "The information we've received, it concerns your recent activities and their potential impact on the monarchy." Kate felt her heart skip a beat, though she maintained her composed exterior. She had always been careful to follow protocol, to represent the royal family with honor and dignity. What could possibly have prompted such a serious meeting? "Over the past several weeks," the king continued, "we have received reports about certain interactions you've had with members of the press. Specifically, there are allegations that you have been sharing information about internal family matters with journalists." The words hit Kate like a physical blow. She felt the color drain from her face, but she forced herself to remain still, to show no reaction that might be interpreted as guilt or defiance. The accusation was so unexpected, so completely contrary to everything she believed about her role and responsibilities, that for a moment she wondered if she had misheard. "I'm afraid the evidence is quite compelling," Queen Camilla added, her voice cool and measured. She reached for a manila folder that had been resting on the table beside her chair. Phone records, meeting logs, witness testimonies. It paints a very concerning picture. Kate's mind raced as she tried to process what was happening. She thought back over the past weeks, searching for any interaction that might have been misinterpreted or taken out of context. There had been a few brief conversations with journalists at official events, but nothing beyond the standard pleasantries expected at such gatherings. One of the king's advisers, a stern man named Sir Geoffrey, whom Kate had always found intimidating, stepped forward with additional documents. "Your Royal Highness, we have documentation of 3 separate instances where confidential information discussed in family meetings was subsequently reported in the press with remarkable accuracy." Kate felt as though the room was closing in around her. The formal atmosphere that she had grown accustomed to over the years now felt suffocating. Every eye in the room was fixed on her, waiting for her response, waiting to see how she would handle these devastating accusations. "Your Majesty," Kate began, her voice steady despite the turmoil she felt inside, "I can assure you that I have never, under any circumstances, shared confidential family information with anyone outside the royal household. The allegations you've presented are completely unfounded." King Charles studied her face carefully, searching for any sign of deception. Kate met his gaze directly, drawing on every ounce of strength and dignity she possessed. She had nothing to hide, and she was determined that her innocence would show through her words and actions. The tension in the room was palpable. Kate could feel the weight of centuries of royal tradition pressing down on her shoulders. She thought of William, who was away on official duties and had no idea what was unfolding at the palace. She thought of their children, innocent of the political machinations that surrounded royal life. As the silence stretched on, Kate realized that this moment would define not just her immediate future, but potentially her entire relationship with the royal family and her role as the future Queen of England. The silence that followed Kate's declaration of innocence seemed to stretch into eternity. She could hear her own heartbeat echoing in her ears as she waited for anyone, to break the oppressive quiet that had settled over the blue drawing room. The king's advisers exchanged meaningful glances, their faces revealing nothing of their thoughts, while Queen Camilla continued to study the documents, in her lap with an expression of cold disappointment. "King," Charles moved away from the window and took his place in the chair that had been positioned to face Kate directly. The morning light from behind him cast his face partly in shadow, making his expression difficult to read. When he spoke again, his voice carried the full weight of his royal authority. "Kate, I want to believe you," he said slowly, each word carefully measured. "But the evidence we have is quite substantial. Perhaps you could explain how information from our private family discussions found its way into the headlines of 3 major newspapers within days of our meetings." Kate felt her stomach tighten, but she forced herself to maintain eye contact with her father-in-law. "Your Majesty, I understand how serious these allegations appear, but I can only tell you the truth. I have never betrayed the confidence of this family. If information has been leaked, it has not come from me." Sir Geoffrey stepped forward again, this time holding a different set of papers. "Your Royal Highness, we have phone records showing calls between your personal mobile and numbers linked to journalists at the Times and the Telegraph. How do you explain these communications?" Kate's mind raced as she tried to recall any phone conversations she might have had with reporters. Then suddenly a memory surfaced, the charity gala 3 weeks ago, where she had exchanged contact information with several journalists who were covering the event. They had called to follow up on quotes for their articles about the fundraising efforts. Those calls were related to the Children's Hospital Charity Gala, Kate explained, relief flooding through her as she remembered the innocent nature of those conversations. The journalists needed clarification on quotes and information about the fundraising totals. Everything we discussed was already part of the public record from the event. Queen Camilla looked up from her documents, her eyebrows raised skeptically. And yet, within 48 hours of our private discussion about reducing the number of working royals, an article appeared quoting a senior royal source with remarkably detailed information about our conversation. Kate felt her confidence waver for the first time. She remembered that family meeting clearly. It had been a sensitive discussion about streamlining the monarchy in which family members would continue to carry out official duties. The information that appeared in the press had indeed been very detailed. almost as if someone had been taking notes during their conversation. "I remember that meeting," Kate said carefully, "but I also remember that there were over a dozen people present, including several staff members who came in and out to serve refreshments and deliver messages. Any one of them could have overheard our discussion." The king's private secretary, a woman named Lady Morrison, whom Kate had always respected, spoke for the first time since the meeting began. "Your Royal Highness, we have conducted discreet inquiries with all staff members who had access to that meeting. Each has provided detailed accounts of their whereabouts and activities. None of them had the opportunity to overhear enough of the conversation to provide the level of detail that appeared in the press." Kate felt the walls closing in around her. Someone was working very hard to make her appear guilty, and they had done their homework thoroughly. She tried to think of who might benefit from destroying her reputation within the family, but the possibilities seemed endless. Palace politics were notorious for their complexity and hidden agendas. "Your Majesty," Kate said, her voice growing stronger as her initial shock began to transform into determination, "I understand that the evidence appears damaging, but I ask you to consider my character and my years of service to this family. Have I ever given you reason to doubt my loyalty or discretion?" King Charles leaned back in his chair, his expression softening slightly. Kate could see that he was genuinely conflicted, torn between the evidence presented to him and his personal knowledge of her character. "No, Kate, you have always conducted yourself with honor and dignity. That is precisely what makes these allegations so troubling." Queen Camilla set her papers aside and looked directly at Kate for the first time since the meeting began. "My dear, no one wants to believe that these accusations are true. But we cannot simply ignore evidence because it is inconvenient or painful to accept." Kate felt a surge of frustration at Camilla's tone, which seemed to carry an undertone of satisfaction despite her words of concern. She had always sensed that Camilla viewed her as a threat to her own position within the family hierarchy, though she had never been able to prove it. "Then perhaps," Kate said, choosing her words very carefully, "we should consider who else might have had access to this information and what they might gain from seeing me discredited." The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge. Kate watched as the king's advisors exchanged quick glances, and she noticed Sir Geoffrey's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Lady Morrison cleared her throat uncomfortably, while Queen Camilla's expression remained carefully neutral. "Are you suggesting that someone within the palace is deliberately framing you?" King Charles asked, his voice carrying a note of incredulity that Kate found both understandable and frustrating. "I'm suggesting that we should examine all possibilities before drawing conclusions," Kate replied firmly. "If someone wanted to damage my relationship with this family, presenting fabricated or manipulated evidence would be an effective way to do it." The accusation created a new tension in the room. Kate realized she was now walking a dangerous line, questioning. The integrity of the king's inner circle was tantamount to accusing them of conspiracy. But she also knew that if she didn't defend herself now, if she simply accepted these charges quietly, her position within the royal family would be irreparably damaged. King Charles stood and walked to one of the tall windows, staring out at the palace gardens where tourists were already beginning to gather for the changing of the guard. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy with the weight of responsibility and uncertainty. "This situation has placed us all in a very difficult position," he said without turning around. "The integrity of the monarchy depends on trust, both within the family and with the public. If there are leaks from within our private discussions, we must find the source and address it decisively." The atmosphere in the blue drawing room grew increasingly tense as King Charles continued to stare out the window, lost in thought. Kate could see the reflection of his troubled face in the glass, and she understood the impossible position he found himself in. As the monarch, he had to protect the integrity of the institution. But as a father-in-law, he was being asked to condemn someone he had grown to trust and respect. Queen Camilla broke the silence by clearing her throat. Delicately, "Charles, we must also consider the public perception of this matter. If word of these allegations reaches the press, regardless of their truth, the damage to the monarchy could be significant." Kate felt a chill run down her spine at Camilla's words. The implication was clear. Even if she could prove her innocence, the mere existence of these accusations could be used to force her into a compromised position within the family. She realized that this meeting wasn't just about determining the truth. It was about managing a crisis that could threaten the stability of the royal household. Sir Geoffrey stepped forward with yet another folder, this one notably thicker than the previous documents. Your Majesty, there is additional information that we have not yet discussed. Information that may shed new light on this situation? Kate watched with growing apprehension as the senior advisor opened the folder and removed what appeared to be a series of photographs. He laid them out on the ornate coffee table in the center of the room, positioning them so that everyone could see. The photographs showed Kate in various locations around London, entering a coffee shop in Kensington, walking through Hyde Park, sitting on a bench near the Serpentine. At first glance, they appeared to be innocent images that could have been taken by any tourist or amateur photographer. But as Kate looked more closely, she noticed that in several of the photos, there were other people visible in the background, people she didn't recognize. These photographs were taken over the past month, Sir Geoffrey explained, his voice taking on the tone of a prosecutor presenting evidence. Our security team became aware of them when they were offered for sale to various media outlets. Kate studied the images more carefully, trying to understand their significance. I don't see how photographs of me going about my daily routine constitute evidence of wrongdoing, she said. Though she could hear the uncertainty creeping into her own voice, Lady Morrison moved closer to the table and pointed to one of the photographs. If you look carefully at this image, taken outside the coffee shop in Kensington, you can see this man in the background. She indicated a figure partially obscured by shadows near a newspaper stand. This same individual appears in 3 other photographs, always maintaining what our security experts describe as surveillance distance. Kate leaned forward to examine the photos more closely. The man Lady Morrison had identified was indeed visible in multiple images, though his face was never clearly shown. He appeared to be middle-aged, wearing casual clothing that would allow him to blend into any London crowd. The realization that she had been under surveillance without her knowledge was deeply unsettling. We believe this individual may be a private investigator or journalist conducting surveillance on your activities, Sir Geoffrey continued. The fact that these photographs were being shopped to media outlets suggests that someone was building a case against you, gathering evidence to support the allegations we've discussed today. King Charles finally turned away from the window, his face grave with concern. Kate, did you notice anyone following you or paying unusual attention to your activities during this period? Kate thought back over the past few weeks, trying to recall any incidents that might have seemed suspicious at the time. There had been moments when she felt as though she was being watched, but she had attributed those feelings to the normal attention that came with being a member of the royal family. Paparazzi and royal watchers were a constant presence in her life, and she had learned to ignore the sensation of being observed. There were a few occasions when I felt as though someone might be watching me, Kate admitted. But that's not unusual given my position. I receive security briefings about potential threats regularly, and I was told to report anything that seemed overtly suspicious. Queen Camilla picked up one of the photographs, examining it with the intensity of a detective studying a crime scene. The question we must ask ourselves is why someone would go to such lengths to build a case against Kate. Who would benefit from her removal from the royal family? The question hung in the air like an accusation, and Kate could see the advisors shifting uncomfortably. The implication that there might be internal politics at play was clearly not something they wanted to discuss openly in front of her. Perhaps, Kate said carefully, we should consider that these photographs and the previous evidence might all be part of a coordinated campaign to discredit me. If someone wanted to remove me from the line of succession or diminish my influence within the family, this would be an effective way to do it. Sir Geoffrey's expression hardened at Kate's suggestion. Your Royal Highness, are you accusing members of the royal household staff of conspiracy? Kate met his gaze directly, drawing on all her years of experience in handling difficult political situations. I'm suggesting that we consider all possibilities. before destroying someone's reputation based on circumstantial evidence. The tension in the room reached a breaking point as Kate's words echoed off the ornate walls. She could see that her direct challenge to the advisor's narrative had caught them off guard. They had expected her to accept the accusations quietly, perhaps even to confess in hopes of receiving lenient treatment. King Charles moved to his chair and sat down heavily, looking older than Kate had ever seen him before. "This situation is becoming increasingly complex," he said, his voice wary with the burden of leadership. "We are dealing not just with potential security breaches, but with questions of loyalty and trust that go to the very heart of how this institution functions." Lady Morrison consulted her notes before speaking again. "Your Majesty, there is one more piece of information that we have not yet shared. Our investigation has revealed that the original allegations came from a single source, someone claiming to have first-hand knowledge of the Princess of Wales's activities." Kate felt her heart racing as she waited for the revelation that might finally shed light on who was behind this elaborate scheme. She had begun to suspect that the evidence against her was too convenient, too perfectly constructed to be entirely coincidental. "The source," Lady Morrison continued, "has requested anonymity but has agreed to meet with Your Majesty privately to provide additional details about their allegations." Kate realized with growing alarm that she was being systematically excluded from the process that would determine her fate. An anonymous accuser, secret meetings, evidence that couldn't be properly examined or challenged. It was beginning to look less like a fair investigation and more like a carefully orchestrated removal operation. Kate felt the walls of the blue drawing room closing in around her as the implications of Lady Morrison's words sank in. An anonymous accuser who would meet privately with the king meant that she would have no opportunity to confront her accuser or challenge their claims directly. In any fair system of justice, such arrangements would be considered fundamentally unjust. But palace protocol operated by different rules than the courts of law. "Your Majesty," Kate said, her voice steady despite the turmoil she felt inside, "I must respectfully request the right to know the identity of my accuser, and to be present during any meetings where these allegations are discussed. Surely the principles of fairness that we expect from our justice system should apply within the royal household as well." King Charles looked uncomfortable with her request, his fingers drumming silently against the arm of his chair. Kate could see the internal conflict playing out on his face, the struggle between his desire to handle the situation discreetly and his recognition that Kate deserved fair treatment. Queen Camilla interjected, before the king could respond. "My dear Kate, you must understand that palace security often requires confidentiality that wouldn't be necessary in ordinary circumstances. If this person has risked their position to bring forward important information, we have an obligation to protect their identity." Kate noticed how Camilla emphasized the word important, as if she had already concluded that the anonymous allegations were credible. The subtle bias in her stepmother-in-law's language was becoming increasingly apparent, and Kate began to wonder if Camilla might have more knowledge about this situation than she was letting on. Sir Geoffrey moved to collect the photographs from the coffee table, but Kate held up her hand to stop him. "Before those are put away, I would like to examine them more carefully," she said. "If someone has been following me, I want to understand the full extent of their surveillance." The senior advisor looked to King Charles for guidance. Receiving a slight nod before handing the photographs back to Kate, she studied each image methodically, looking for details that might have been overlooked in the initial presentation. As she examined the photo taken in Hyde Park, Kate noticed something that made her pulse quicken. In the background, partially visible behind a tree, was a woman with distinctive red hair wearing a green coat. Kate recognized her immediately. It was Margaret Thornberry, a former palace staff member who had been dismissed 6 months earlier for what were described as disciplinary reasons. "Your Majesty," Kate said, pointing to the figure in the background, "I believe I can identify someone else who appears in these surveillance photographs." This woman worked in the palace communications office until her dismissal last year. Lady Morrison leaned over to examine the area Kate was indicating, her expression growing suddenly tense. "Are you certain of this identification, Your Royal Highness?" Kate nodded confidently. "Margaret Thornberry. She was dismissed for inappropriate communications with media outlets. If she's involved in this surveillance operation, it would explain how someone gained access to detailed information about our private family discussions." The revelation created an immediate shift in the atmosphere of the room. The advisors began exchanging quick glances, and Kate could see that her identification of Margaret Thornberry had introduced a new element they hadn't expected to deal with. King Charles leaned forward in his chair, his interest clearly piqued. "Sir Geoffrey, what can you tell us about Miss Thornberry's dismissal and her potential access to sensitive information?" Sir Geoffrey consulted his notes, though Kate suspected he already knew the information by heart. Margaret Thornberry was employed in the communications office for 3 years before her dismissal. She had access to meeting schedules, press strategies, and limited information about family activities. Her dismissal was related to unauthorized contacts with journalists. Kate felt a surge of vindication as the pieces began to fall into place. If Miss Thornberry was already engaged in unauthorized communications with the press before her dismissal, and if she's now conducting surveillance on me, doesn't it seem likely that she could be the source of the leaked information? Queen Camilla's expression remained carefully neutral, but Kate noticed a slight tightening around her eyes. "That's certainly a possibility we should explore," she said. Though her tone suggested reluctance to abandon the original theory of Kate's guilt, Lady Morrison cleared her throat before speaking. "Your Majesty, if Miss Thornberry is involved in this matter, it raises questions about the security of our internal communications and the effectiveness of our background screening procedures." Kate seized on this opening to press her case further. "It also raises questions about whether the evidence presented against me today might have been manufactured or manipulated by someone with intimate knowledge of palace procedures and access to information about my daily activities. The suggestion that the evidence might have been fabricated created a new tension in the room. Kate could see that the advisors were uncomfortable with the implications of what she was suggesting, that someone had orchestrated an elaborate scheme to frame her for crimes she didn't commit. King Charles stood and walked to the fireplace, staring into the cold ashes of yesterday's fire. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a man grappling with the complexity of leading an ancient institution in modern times. "If what you're suggesting is true, Kate, then we are dealing with something far more serious than simple information leaks. We would be looking at a deliberate conspiracy to undermine the stability of the royal family." Kate nodded gravely. "Your Majesty, I believe that's exactly what we're dealing with. Someone has gone to considerable lengths to build a case against me, using forged or manipulated evidence and anonymous accusations that cannot be properly challenged." Sir Geoffrey stepped forward, his expression stern. "Your Royal Highness, these are very serious allegations. Do you have any evidence to support your theory of a conspiracy?" Kate gestured toward the photographs still spread across the coffee table. "The presence of Margaret Thornberry in these surveillance photos is evidence. Her history of unauthorized media contact is evidence. The convenient timing of anonymous accusations is evidence." Queen Camilla picked up one of the photographs, studying it with renewed interest. "Even if Miss Thornberry is involved, that doesn't necessarily exonerate you, Kate. It's possible that you were working together." The suggestion hit Kate like a physical blow. She realized that no matter how much evidence she presented in her defense, there would always be another theory, another possibility that could be used to maintain suspicion about her guilt. "Your Majesty," Kate said, turning to address King Charles directly, "I understand that you have an obligation to investigate these allegations thoroughly. But I also ask that you consider my years of loyal service to this family and my consistent record of discretion and integrity." King Charles turned away from the fireplace, his eyes meeting Kate's with an intensity that seemed to search her very soul. The moment stretched between them, filled with the weight of years of shared experiences and mutual respect. The room fell into absolute silence, as everyone waited for the king's response. Kate knew that whatever he said next would determine not just the immediate future, but the entire trajectory of her life within the royal family. The silence in the blue drawing room seemed to stretch into eternity as King Charles studied Kate's face, searching for any trace of deception or guilt. Kate met his gaze steadily, drawing on every ounce of courage and dignity she possessed. She knew that this moment would define not just her relationship with the royal family, but her entire future as the woman destined to one day be Queen of England. Finally, King Charles spoke, his voice heavy with the burden of making a decision that would affect the entire monarchy. "Kate, your service to this family has indeed been exemplary. Your dedication to your royal duties and your discretion in handling sensitive matters have never been questioned before this day." Kate felt a flicker of hope at his words, but she could sense there was more coming. The king's expression remained troubled, and she knew he was struggling with the weight of the evidence that had been presented against her. "However," King Charles continued, "the allegations we have discussed today are too serious to dismiss without a thorough investigation. Until we can determine the truth of this matter, I'm afraid certain precautions must be taken." Kate's heart sank as she realized what was coming. The precautions he spoke of would undoubtedly limit her access to sensitive information and her participation in key royal activities. Even if she was eventually exonerated, the damage to her reputation and standing within the family would be significant. Queen Camilla leaned forward in her chair, her expression one of carefully controlled sympathy. "Kate, dear, we must think about what's best for the monarchy as a whole. While we work to get to the bottom of this situation, it would be prudent to limit your involvement in confidential family discussions." The irony of Camilla's words was not lost on Kate, the woman who had once been considered an outsider to the royal family, whose own relationship with the monarchy had been controversial, was now deciding Kate's fate within the institution. Sir Geoffrey stepped forward with another folder, this one containing what appeared to be official documents. "Your Royal Highness, we have prepared a temporary adjustment to your royal schedule and responsibilities. This will remain in effect until the investigation is completed." Kate accepted the documents with hands that she forced to remain steady, though inside she felt as though her world was crumbling around her. She scanned the pages quickly, noting the removal of her access to classified briefings, her exclusion from strategic planning meetings, and the suspension of her involvement in several high-profile royal engagements. "These measures seem quite extreme," Kate said carefully, "especially given that no conclusive evidence of wrongdoing has been established. I worry about the message this sends, both within the family and to the public." Lady Morrison consulted her notes before responding. "Your Royal Highness, these adjustments have been carefully crafted to minimize public attention. Most of the changes will not be visible to media or the general public." Kate realized that even as they were limiting her role, the palace officials were working to ensure that the restrictions wouldn't become a public relations disaster. The monarchy's primary concern was always protecting its image and maintaining stability. Regardless of the cost to individual family members, King Charles moved closer to Kate, his expression softening slightly. "I want you to understand that these measures are temporary. If the investigation clears you of these allegations, your full responsibilities will be restored immediately." Kate looked up at her father-in-law, seeing both the monarch and the man struggling with an impossible situation. "Your Majesty, I appreciate your position, but I must ask, what if the investigation doesn't provide clear answers? What if we never definitively identify the true source of these leaks?" The question hung in the air like a sword over Kate's head. Everyone in the room understood the implications. If the matter remained unresolved, Kate's position within the royal family could remain compromised indefinitely. "Queen." Camilla cleared her throat delicately before speaking. "In such a case, we would need to consider what level of risk the monarchy can reasonably accept. The institution must be protected, even if that means making difficult decisions about individual family members. Kate felt a chill run through her at Camilla's words. The message was clear if doubt remained about her loyalty. She could find herself permanently marginalized within the family, regardless of her actual guilt or innocence. "There is another matter we must address," Sir Geoffrey said, producing yet another set of documents. "The anonymous source who brought these allegations to our attention has requested a private meeting with Your Majesty. They claim to have additional information that could be crucial to resolving this matter." Kate stood abruptly, no longer able to contain her frustration with the process. "Your Majesty, I must protest this arrangement. How can I defend myself against accusations when I'm not allowed to know who my accuser is or what specific claims they're making?" King Charles raised his hand in a gesture meant to calm the situation. "Kate, please understand that palace security sometimes requires confidentiality that might seem unfair under normal circumstances. But I give you my word that any information provided by this source will be carefully evaluated for credibility and accuracy." Kate realized that she was fighting against centuries of royal tradition that prioritized institutional protection over individual rights. The palace had weathered countless scandals and crises by maintaining tight control over information and limiting exposure to potential threats. "When will this meeting with the anonymous source take place?" Kate asked, resigned to the fact that she couldn't prevent it but determined to understand the timeline for her own fate. Lady Morrison consulted her calendar before responding. "The meeting has been scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. We expect to have a preliminary report on their information within 48 hours. Kate nodded, accepting that she would have to endure at least 2 more days of uncertainty while her future hung in the balance. She thought about William, who would return from his official duties to find his wife under suspicion of betraying the royal family. She thought about their children, who would eventually need to understand why their mother's role in the family had suddenly changed. As the meeting began to wind down, King Charles approached Kate with an expression of genuine concern. "Kate, I want you to know that regardless of how this situation develops, you will always be family. Your contributions to the monarchy and your dedication to your royal duties have not gone unnoticed." Kate felt tears threatening to form, but she blinked them back, determined to maintain her composure until she could leave the room with dignity. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I hope that, when this investigation is complete, the truth will vindicate my loyalty to this family." As Kate prepared to leave the blue drawing room, she knew that the next few days would determine whether she could reclaim her place within the royal family or whether she would forever remain under a cloud of suspicion that could destroy everything she had worked to build. 2 days had passed since the devastating meeting in the blue drawing room, and Kate had spent them in a state of suspended animation, waiting for word about the investigation that would determine her fate. She had gone through the motions of her remaining royal duties, but the weight of suspicion hung over her like a dark cloud that refused to lift. On the morning of the 3rd day, Kate received an urgent summons to return to Buckingham Palace. The message, delivered by the same stone-faced aide who had first brought her to the confrontation, contained only the essential information. She was to present herself to the throne room at 2 o'clock sharp. As Kate made her way through the familiar corridors of the palace, she noticed that something was different. Staff members who usually greeted her with warm smiles now averted their eyes, their expressions carefully neutral. Word of the investigation had clearly spread throughout the palace, and Kate realized that her reputation was already being tainted by suspicion. Regardless of the outcome, the throne room was far more formal than the blue drawing room where the accusations had first been presented. The ornate chairs beneath the canopy, the massive chandeliers, and the portraits of monarchs stretching back centuries all served to emphasize the gravity of whatever announcement was about to be made. King Charles stood near the throne, but not upon it, suggesting that this meeting, while formal, was still considered a family matter rather than an official royal decree. Queen Camilla was present, along with Sir Geoffrey and Lady Morrison, but there were also several faces that Kate didn't recognize, investigators, she assumed, brought in to handle the sensitive nature of the case. As Kate entered the room and offered her formal curtsy, she noticed that King Charles looked older than he had just 3 days earlier. The weight of the investigation and its implications for the monarchy had clearly taken its toll on him. "Kate," King Charles began, his voice echoing slightly in the vast room, "please take a seat. We have significant developments to share with you regarding the investigation into the alleged information leaks." Kate settled into the indicated chair, her hands folded in her lap in the same composed manner she had maintained throughout this ordeal. But inside, her heart was racing with anticipation and fear about what she was about to hear. Sir Geoffrey stepped forward with a thick folder, his expression unreadable. "Your Royal Highness, our investigation has uncovered several important pieces of information that shed new light on this entire situation." Kate held her breath, waiting for whatever revelation would either vindicate her or confirm her worst fears about her future within the royal family. "First," Sir Geoffrey continued, "we were able to locate and interview Margaret Thornberry, the former palace employee you identified in the surveillance photographs. Under questioning, she admitted to conducting unauthorized surveillance on your activities." Kate felt a surge of vindication, but she forced herself to remain composed as she waited for the rest of the information. "Miss Thornberry revealed that she had been hired by a third party to gather information about your daily routines and activities. She was paid to photograph you and to attempt to gain access to information about your schedule and engagements." Queen Camilla leaned forward slightly, her expression tense. "Who hired her to conduct this surveillance?" Sir Geoffrey exchanged a meaningful look with Lady Morrison before continuing. "Miss Thornberry identified her employer as Jonathan Blackwood, a private investigator with known connections to several tabloid newspapers. Mr. Blackwood has since fled the country, but we have been able to trace payments to Miss Thornberry through bank records." Kate felt as though a weight was slowly being lifted from her shoulders, but she knew there was more to come. The revelation about the surveillance explained how her movements had been monitored, but it didn't yet address the leaked information from family meetings. King Charles moved closer to Kate's chair, his expression grave. "There's more, Kate. Our investigation into the leaked information has revealed something quite disturbing about the source of the palace security breach." Kate's pulse quickened as she waited for this final piece of the puzzle to be revealed. Lady Morrison stepped forward with another set of documents. "Your Royal Highness, the anonymous source who brought the original allegations against you has been identified. Through careful analysis of the information they provided and their knowledge of palace procedures, we were able to determine their identity." Kate felt her breath catch in her throat as she realized that the moment of truth had finally arrived. "The source," Lady Morrison continued, "was Amanda Westfield, a senior communications advisor who has worked closely with the royal household for over 5 years. She had access to meeting schedules, family discussions, and strategic communications." Kate was stunned by the revelation. Amanda Westfield was someone she had worked with regularly, someone she had trusted and considered a professional colleague. The betrayal felt personal and devastating. Queen Camilla's expression showed genuine shock. "Amanda Westfield? But she's been with us for years. What could possibly have motivated her to fabricate such serious allegations?" Sir Geoffrey consulted his notes before responding. Under questioning, Ms. Westfield admitted that she had been experiencing financial difficulties due to gambling debts. She was approached by the same private investigator, Jonathan Blackwood, and offered substantial payment to provide information that could be used to discredit the Princess of Wales. Kate felt a complex mix of emotions, relief at her vindication, anger at the betrayal, and sadness that someone she had trusted had been willing to destroy her reputation for money. King Charles moved to stand directly in front of Kate, his expression one of profound regret and genuine sorrow. "Kate, I owe you the most sincere apology that a king can offer to a member of his family. You have been subjected to a terrible injustice, and I deeply regret that you were forced to endure suspicion and restrictions based on fabricated evidence." Kate felt tears welling up in her eyes. But this time she didn't try to hold them back. The emotional toll of the past few days, combined with the relief of vindication, was overwhelming. "Miss Westfield has been arrested and will face charges for her role in this conspiracy," Lady Morrison added. "The investigation has also revealed that this was part of a larger scheme to destabilize the royal family by creating internal conflicts and undermining public trust." King Charles knelt down beside Kate's chair, a gesture so unexpected and humble that everyone in the room seemed to hold their breath. "Kate, I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive an old man who allowed doubt to cloud his judgment. Your loyalty to this family has never been in question, and I should have trusted in your character from the beginning." As Kate bowed her head, overwhelmed by the emotion of the moment and the king's unprecedented display of humility, silence took over the room. Even the most senior palace officials stood in respectful quiet. Recognizing the profound significance of the monarch's gesture, the silence stretched on, filled with the weight of justice restored and trust rebuilt. When Kate finally raised her head, her eyes met those of her father-in-law, and in that moment, both the king and the man stood before her, moved by the strength and grace she had shown throughout her ordeal. "Your Majesty," Kate said softly, "there is nothing to forgive. This experience has only strengthened my resolve to serve this family and this institution with even greater dedication." The king nodded, his own eyes now bright with emotion. As the room remained wrapped in the profound silence that follows the resolution of a great injustice and the restoration of honor to those who deserve it most,